The Simon Bolivar Bridge has become symbolic of the exodus from Venezuela. The crossing is also just one piece of the complex puzzle facing Colombia as it struggles to absorb the increasing influx of migrants prompted by its neighbour's economic and social meltdown. Up to 45,000 migrants cross on foot from Venezuela to Cúcuta every day. The Colombian city has become the last hope for many fleeing Venezuela's crumbling economy.
Back there's no food, you can't find anything. There are no medicines. We had to come here to vaccinate the baby.
At home, we only have electricity for 2 hours a day. We have water from 1 to 3 hours every 2 days. There's no gas.
It's a challenge to be able to get everyone in our family to sit at the table and have a meal at least once a day.
You can't live on 700 to 1,000 bolivars every 2 weeks. You can't live even if you earn 2 million bolivars in 2 weeks. You can't live on that.
Now in its fifth year of recession, critics blame both the government and corruption in Venezuela for the country's crippling economic crisis. Last year, inflation topped 2,600%. This year, the IMF expects it to hit 13,000%. In March, President Nicolas Maduro announced plans to change the face value of the country's Bolivar currency, knocking 3 zeros off.
It is much cheaper here and you can get anything. You can find mayonnaise, toilet paper, the essential things needed to feel human. There's no toilet paper or napkins back home. How is it possible that 1 litre of petrol costs 1 bolivar and 1 litre of water costs 5,000? For the love of God!
The bridge from Venezuela to Cúcuta is the main border point between the two Latin American neighbours. Scores of small businesses have sprung up, from stalls offering to buy hair to wheelchair taxi services, proof of people's ingenuity in the face of extreme adversity.
This is a symbol of an economy in freefall, when one bag made out of bolivars is worth more than the banknotes themselves.
One of these bags would buy just a packet of salt in Venezuela, but sold in Colombia, it has the potential to provide this family of 3 with food for a week.
We started making hearts, making airplanes with banknotes. For me, this is an art, because in reality, with this money, I cannot buy anything in Venezuela. You have to have a huge amount of this cash to buy what you need.
It's estimated more than 1 million Venezuelans have settled in Colombia. On arrival, at least, they are not considered refugees. But irrespective of whether those fleeing want to live in Colombia or simply use it as a gateway elsewhere, first they need to be allowed in.
In order to enter Colombia, they need a passport. There are people who manage to get the border mobility card, which is a temporary permit. In addition to that, about a year ago, Colombia created a special visa, which is another way of establishing yourself once you are already in the country. To obtain it, you must have entered Colombia regularly with your passport stamped.
To stem the flow of migrants from Venezuela, Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos recently announced an end to the border mobility card scheme. The temporary visas were the most common documents used by poor Venezuelans, given the difficulty of obtaining a passport.
You cannot get a passport. You can get one if you pay. They were asking for around 10 million bolivars. A salary is about 400,000 to 500,000 bolivars. This means 500,000 bolivars, and we're talking 10 million. That's more than 1 year's salary to pay for a passport.
With neither the correct documents or the right to work, thousands of Venezuelans who once held decent jobs at home have been reduced to begging for food and small change in Cúcuta. At one shelter run by the Catholic Church, they distribute more than 1,000 free meals a day. Some just cross the bridge for the food.
The situation is horrible. We come here because in San Cristobal there is no food. I worked at the town hall of San Cristobal, but the money wasn't enough to eat.
Others cross the border in the hope of finding any sort of job to send money back home. Many families have been split apart.
Venezuela's a country which makes me deeply sad, because I've left my 3 children behind in order to come here and find a job to send them some money. What would I do if I brought them here? Where would I keep them? I couldn't keep them on the street.
Where are you going to sleep tonight?
I don't know. Perhaps in the street. Wherever I can find.
The epicenter of Venezuela's migrant exodus in Colombia is in the historically volatile region of Norte de Santander. Armed groups still control vast swathes here despite a peace deal with FARC in 2016. That officially ended the 52-year conflict, but many of Colombia's internally displaced now live in Cúcuta's poorest districts.
Since August, the number of Venezuelan migrants entering Cúcuta's most vulnerable neighbourhoods has risen from 0 to 3,000.
Church missionaries who work in the city's poorest areas say the migrants run a huge risk of exploitation.
This massive influx of Venezuelans, many of whom are trained professionals, has obviously presented a big opportunity for dishonest employers. They can make half promises, pay badly, or not even pay them at all. The migrants can also be recruited and sent somewhere. They can be asked to harvest coffee or even coca leaves.
Faced with this massive influx, Colombia has called for international help. The EU's chief for humanitarian aid recently met President Santos and also visited Cúcuta for himself. During the visit, he announced Europe would be providing an additional €31 million in funding, 2 million of which will go to Venezuela and 6 million to Colombia.
For Colombian authorities, it's a huge challenge to deal with this unprecedented situation. But because, of course, they face also their challenges in their country about the reconciliation process and peace process. So our humanitarian aid is going in both sides, inside Venezuela and inside Colombia. Especially in Venezuela, we are trying a lot in order to find ways to provide, in particular, medicines and to find projects to deal with acute malnutrition.
International aid agencies are also working with the Colombian government to provide more shelter for the migrants. But President Santos has been heavily criticised over Colombia's efforts to stem the migrant flow. The head of one migration centre believes Bogotá's stricter policy will backfire by actually increasing the number of illegal entries.
The measures taken by the government are effectively a diplomatic closure of the border. Now Venezuelans need a passport or a special permit to enter. Everything is much more complex. The alternative for migrants is to go via illegal entry points. Everyone knows there are criminal groups acting outside the law. This puts the migrants' welfare at risk.
Since February, the authorities in Colombia claim migrant numbers have dropped by more than 30%. They also say nearly 1,500 people have been repatriated. The Venezuelans we spoke to branded the new measures as deportations. One young man forced onto the street was among them, despite having a passport.
As a Venezuelan citizen, when I arrive in another country, I know there are laws that must be observed. I'm working and looking for a legal way to earn a living and get by every day. You cannot evict me from the country, and even less to take the merchandise as they have done. In Venezuela, there are 6 million Colombians that make a living there and still do very well. But when I come here, they want to throw me out. Why? Where's the justice in that? What did Bolivar want? A united nation? There is xenophobia in Colombia. There is xenophobia because we're Venezuelans.
Cúcuta looks like a city that's been hit by a natural disaster, the disaster that is Venezuela. Its roots are economic and political. It has left its people with few choices.
Monica Pinna, Cúcuta, Euronews.